We are rolling. Okay, so as we all know, we are having uncomfortable conversations. The title of this series is Uncomfortable Conversations with LVC Minority Students. And the intention of these sessions are to make sure that we, one, have conversations that we normally wouldn't have, and with groups of people that we normally wouldn't have groups conversations with these particular people. So that's what we're going to strive to do today. And so I put my number in the chat. Did everyone get that? Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I say this when I do a lot of the conversations that I do. We cannot move to a space of understanding and learning and growth if we're not uncomfortable. We have to make sure that we are uncomfortable to move to a place of comfortability. And I know that's a lot of syllables and a lot of words in one packed sentence. But what I'm getting at is the fact of, if we want to grow, if we want to learn, if we want to become more dynamic individuals, we have to push ourselves to be uncomfortable. And so if during this conversation, because I do feel as though that is uncomfortable for a reason. So we feel as though that anytime during this conversation, someone says something that's like, oh, that's a little offensive, or ouch, that hurt, or anything like that, you can do one of three things. One, ask yourself, okay, am I feeling uncomfortable because I just hadn't I wasn't faced with that perspective before. Am I not, I'm just not aware of that perspective. So it made me feel a little uncomfortable. If that's the case, then I would encourage you to push yourself to stay in the session and to challenge yourself and to challenge others around you, understanding that this is how we grow. Secondly, if anything happened where you feel uncomfortable or you feel like that was offensive or anything like that, you can text me and let me know. So I will want you to do one or two things. One, if something offended you, or that was disrespectful, or that was racist, that was discriminatory, or anything like that, I would encourage you to say something yourself so that we understand where you're coming from. But if you do not feel comfortable in saying that, text me and let me know, hey, this affected me in this moment, ouch, and I will address it for you. The third thing that we can do is you can text me and say, hey, look, I have to leave the session because it's a little bit too much, because yes, we have to learn and grow and stuff like that, but I do not want anyone to be in a situation where it's physically or emotionally or mentally taxing to you. So, definitely feel free to exit the conversation if need be. Is that pretty clear to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad that we got some audible responses. The next thing before we really get rocking and rolling is that I always say this in my sessions as well. It's important when we had conversations such as these that we are listening to understand and not listening to respond. Because a lot of times what we do is when we listen to respond, we already formulated our response. We already formulated our opinion. Our perspective is right there in our mind, and it's blotting out. It's not allowing us to truly listen and truly understand what that person is saying. Now, understanding something that someone is saying is not the same as agreeing. That's not the same thing. So you can disagree vehemently with someone. However, as long as you're trying to understand and you're being open-minded, I did put this in the email and I'm gonna just reiterate it again. In these sessions, I ask everyone to come with open minds, hearts, and opinions. And so I know a good amount of you all in this call. And so I ask you to, one, listen to understand and not listen to respond, but also push yourself, challenge others in this conversation, and just be honest, be open, because I kind of have a really good knack of sensing what someone wants to say if they're not saying it, they beating around the bush, or they sugarcoating, or whatever phrase you want to use. So I will pull it out of you if you don't pull it out of yourself. All right. So we're going to try to make this conversation be as open. So I'm going to ask you to, just jump in. Whenever I say, jump in, anything like that. We're not going to have this be too lectury, anything like that. We got to try to break down these walls, make it a little bit warm in this virtual Zoom room in order for this to happen accurately. So can we just do like a quick sound check of everyone? This is what we're going to do. So the first question I'm going to ask everyone is making sure that everyone is in the right space. This is You Judged Me Before You Met Me, Erasing the Stigma of Mental and Physical Disabilities. Is that the session that everyone is agreed that they should be in?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Yes.
great. Look at that, we're improving. Okay, so we're going to do a sound check, and to make sure that this go as smoothly as possible, usually I do the popcorn thing, but to make sure this go like quick like that, because we are on a time restraint, I'm gonna just call out someone, and what I want you to do is, one, let us know what you prefer to be called as, and then secondly, let us know what drew you to this particular prompt, what drew you to this particular topic. Why do you feel as though that you in particular should have a seat at this table with all these remarkable individuals? So I think I've been getting the most audible responses from Dr. Marks. So Dr. Marks, I'm gonna start with you, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Khalil. So, hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Marks. My pronouns are she, her. And I was interested in this conversation for a few reasons. Professionally, I'm a licensed psychologist, so I have a lot of training in the mental health field. And obviously, I teach a lot of the more clinically focused classes at LVC in the psychology department. And then more personally, so I do have a hearing disability. I wear a hearing aid. I have a service dog for medical alerts, and I have had a history of depression as well. So I think personally and professionally. And then I also just always want to learn from my students and figure out how I can be better in the classroom and supporting everyone. So that's why I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and that level of candor. I wish we all can harness a little bit. Shinee, can we go with you?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Shinee Bhattacharya. I'm an assistant professor in the English department. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I didn't particularly choose any session. I left it up to Khalil to play God and place me wherever he felt I needed to be. I was interested in all the sessions that were planned because they all seemed like very important conversations we needed to have. And sort of to reiterate what Jenna said, I think that this conversation is very important. I want to learn from my students because so many of my students struggle with either mental health or physical disabilities. I personally have people very close to me who have chronic depression. So this is something that I would like to talk about more and get comfortable talking about, because I feel like in the culture I grew up in, talking about mental health was a taboo. So this is something that I find extremely important to talk about. So thanks for having me here.
No problemo. And that taboo effect, I'm definitely gonna dig into a bit. Brittany, how about we swing it to you?
Hi, my name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a freshman neuroscience major with planning to minor in psychology. So here I am for the mental illness part of it, but also the physical. But I do have generalized anxiety disorder, which is why I feel like I should have been a part of this conversation. My brother also has bipolar disorder, so I feel like I can contribute a lot to this conversation because of the background that I have with mental illness.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Let's go, Nick.
My name's Nick. I'm a senior here, exercise science major. And for myself, I wanted to be in this discussion not only because of my father who suffers from PTSD because of the military and like reading up on the like traumatic brain injuries and things like that, but also with depression and anxiety running within the family and taking medication as an individual myself. And just also having a lot of friends that I've had to talk through depression with and make them understand like how it actually like affects people and how a lot of people like do not notice it in most individuals. And then I just wanted to understand other people's like perspectives on it as well.
Thank you so much, Nick. Let's go, Dr. McLaren.
Hi, James McLaren, pronouns he, him, and his. I'm interested in this topic for a number of reasons and really to listen and learn as much. I think the pandemic is going to just amplify some of the challenges that we're seeing in mental health issues, particularly amongst the college age. And so it's something that I worry and care about and want to learn about. You know, in terms of physical disability, I'm not sure how this fits in, but you know, my wife had been on dialysis for a while, and I saw just how debilitating a physical ailment could be. She got a transplant 5 years ago, which has been really a life changer, but it's still been a slowing down on what she's able to do. And we're always worried about, will she catch COVID? As an immunosuppressed person, what will her lifespan be like with transplanted organs? So, you know, I worry about these things, and you know, for both sides of it. So I'm very interested in our conversation tonight.
Thank you so much. Let's go, Jacob.
Hi everyone, my name is Jacob. My pronouns are the she series. I'm a sophomore psychology major, also in 3+2 clinical mental health program. I'm interested in this conversation not only as a psychology student, but as someone who works in the mental health field. I work at a mental hospital. It's really important to me that these things are understood and that, you know, different perspectives are seen. And so I really am interested in this conversation, mostly to learn, but also to learn how to also be an advocate for people with mental health and people with physical disabilities, especially after some of the events that occurred this year. I'm interested to see what all of you have to offer tonight.
And Janae, thank you, Jacob, for that. And Janae.
Hi, my name is Janae. I go by she, her, hers. I'm a freshman. I am a criminal justice and actuarial science double major. And I also kind of left it up to Khalil to put me in whatever session he thinks that like I kind of would fit best in and wherever he needed me. But I'm really glad that I got put in this one for the mental side of it, for things that I've experienced, my friends and my families have experienced, and for the physical side of it, just to learn how to advocate for people more and learn how to be more aware and more supportive of people who do have physical disabilities.
Thank you so much. And I'll throw my anecdote into the ring. A lot of you probably already know, but I am visually impaired. So I'm more so on the physical side of the response when it comes to physical disabilities. However, mental disability also runs in my family as well. So coming up, you know, I was able to learn a lot, be exposed a lot, and a little bit kind of take a step away from that taboo that Shinee talked about just briefly earlier in her introduction. But because of those different things, I was fortunate enough to walk both sides of being a part, like living my life as someone who has a visual impairment, but also grow up in a family with individuals who have mental health issues. So that's why, so I don't know if you all know this, but I wrote all of the questions and I tried to make them as provocative as I possibly could. And that was one of the reasons, my own personal experience was the reason as to why I wrote this topic in particular, because it affects me, you know, so much in my life. So one of the questions to get us started, and I think it might be a good way for us to look at it, just look at the simple question of erasing the stigma of mental and physical disabilities. So the first thing I want us to look at is the stigma part of it. Do we think that there is a stigma attached to mental and physical disabilities? And if so, why? And to get us started, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just call on someone if you feel comfortable, and then I'm gonna just let it roll. For whoever wanna jump in, double dutch, please jump in. But I'm gonna start with Nick. Nick, just to reiterate, the question is, do you think there's a stigma when it comes to mental and physical disabilities? And if so, why do you think that is?
I definitely think there is a huge stigma with it. I think it mainly comes with the portrayal that it's seen through, like, not just like media, but like everyday sort of conversations. A lot of times, like in the past, like if you like look through like history books and like different history shows, it's always shown that people that have like certain like physical disabilities or like mental disabilities are seen as crazy people, or like And because of that, you have people that try to hide it and try to like suppress it in a sense to like make sure you're like, oh no, I don't want to be like labeled as this one specific thing, even though it's something that many people would like go through. Like for myself, when I first started having like depression and anxiety like 7 years ago, it was something that I hid away from people. I didn't tell my parents for like 5 years. And then once I finally told them, my dad came out and told me about his PTSD and depression and anxiety that runs through the family. And I started talking to other friends about it, and they have it as well. And from that on, I saw it as like a bigger picture. As before, it was like a small image of being like, oh no, I don't want to be labeled as this person. Nobody's going to think I'm saying the truth. Nobody's going to think it's like real. I'm just going to be crazy. But then after a while, seeing it that more people have the same sort of like things come up in their life, I saw it as like so much more of like a normal situation of it all. And I felt like more connected to other people instead of being like separated and isolated from others.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Nick. Does anyone want to jump in?
I would definitely have to agree. Like I said earlier, I have generalized anxiety disorder. I was diagnosed when I was about 8, I think. But ever since then, I feel like I'm seen as not as smart as other people. I definitely feel like the mental and physical disabilities are seen as like you're less than, or you're not as smart as like I don't know what they call it now, but like the neurotypical person. But I do feel like I'm seen as less than, and I have been talking to my mom about this, but I do think that I also have ADD. But I don't want to be labeled as a person who has ADD or a person who has generalized anxiety disorder. So I feel like that's also a stigma of being labeled, and also not being as smart as the neurotypical person.
Yeah, definitely.
I think along with people seeing people with disabilities, whether they are physical or mental, as less than, I think people also see them as defective. Like, you're not the typical person. You can't, like, they see it as you can't do the same things. We're not on the same level. You're defective than what a normal person, normal end quotes, can do and can be. And I think that's like being defective, being less than. I think these are all of the reasons, like Nick said, that people try to hide what's really going on because of the conversation that sparks when you are out about it and you're like, oh, I'm experiencing this. And then you're sometimes seen as less than. It gives people all the more reason to hide everything. And it's why these conversations aren't happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, as I'm listening to you, I constantly think about how the stigma ties to the notions of ableism, right? Because so much of the conversation around physical and mental disability is curative, rehabilitative. As one of you pointed out, this isn't like it's a problem of labels, as Brittany was saying, but it's also this notion of this is something that is aberrant and hence must be cured, hence must be changed, because obviously the notion is that if you have any of these conditions, surely you don't want to live with them, because in our ableist understanding, that is wrong, right? Or defective. I think that was a really powerful word, this really problematic way of thinking about this. And also, if we think about the centuries-long link between disability and moral degradation that you see in various cultures and societies, I think it really feeds into this narrative of let us cure rather than let us reimagine how we understand bodies and minds.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I think further to that, there's an expectation that because a mental illness is not visible in the same way that a physical disability might be, that you should just kind of get over it, and it can't be real because it's not visible. And I think that just exacerbates kind of the ideas that Nick had about internalizing it and not being able to sort of figure out what the next steps would be. So I think this idea that when something's not visible, it's not really there, is one of the problems associated with the stigma of mental illness.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if someone else wanted to jump in, but I wanted to tease out the emotions behind this. So like I know Nick, Janae, and Brittany touched upon this a little bit, but when you feel as though society label you as less than or label you as defective, how does that in turn impact the way that you live your life or that you think of yourself? If you kind of get where I'm coming from. And anyone can respond to that. How when society says that you're defective or that you're not normal, or this is something you should get over just like that, and just with medicine it'll go away. How does that in turn make you or influence you to live your life?
I think it's like a big change of how it actually affects you as an individual. Because in the first stages of when I had to deal with depression and anxiety and trying to understand it, I always thought that I was just weird in the aspect of how I felt and not understanding my emotions to a point. But truly, once I actually started sitting down with therapists and talking about it and actually opening up to my parents about it, I started to figure out that I have anxiety and depression comes more of an emotional aspect of feeling it way too much than other individuals and overthinking to a point where it's consistently an issue where I do not know how to truly handle it. And because of that, it started becoming an issue to internalize everything and being more of an outcast and not trying to engage into certain emotions because they would trigger the mind to start racing, and I would act out in a different way. And because of that, over the years, I would try to minimize the amount of attention I'd give to people and the way I talked and everything like that. And I would always try to be the most helpful and the most most unengaging way of always being there for other people, but not trying to be around as much, if that even makes sense. But it's definitely an interesting aspect of how it affects you as an individual and how you truly do life in a daily manner.
I would you can go ahead if you want. I've already talked.
That's okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I would definitely have to agree. Like I said, I was diagnosed when I was really young, so I didn't really know what anxiety was. I just knew that this thing was happening to me and it wasn't normal. I didn't tell a lot of people when I was younger, obviously, because I had no idea what it was. But now I'm really open about it, and I surround myself with people who actually understand what's going on. I don't like to surround myself with people who think that they're above me because I have anxiety and depression. I'm actually going through something right now that I just started a new medication, and I've never been on medication before. I've always been able to, I don't know, neutralize my anxiety. Yeah, cope with anxiety through therapy, but it just got really bad starting freshman year. So I went on medication, and I feel like I'm not my real self. I feel like my medication, I am my medication. I'm not really myself, but I just thought I would share that because I feel the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Nick, when you were talking, it really resonated a lot with me and my experience of having symptoms of depression. I think for me, the way that my depression manifests itself is that it tells me that I should isolate and that I should keep to myself and that I should not reach out to other people. And so for me, it's just a very pervasive feeling of loneliness. And so I think one thing that I am trying to and still working towards is that when I see those symptoms popping up, making sure that I reach out and that I connect with people. And so you would think that as someone who's trained in the field, this would be easy for me. However, I'm here to tell you that this is still really challenging. And so I think it was a day, maybe about a month ago, where I was just hysterically crying in the car on the way to work for kind of no reason. And I was like, okay, I need to do something about that. So I resumed my medication, and now I'm feeling much better. But I think trying to recognize those things earlier on is something that I've been trying to work towards, and making sure that I do make connections with other people, because I think it does tell you, you don't want to be a burden on other people. You don't want to seem like you have a problem. You don't want to seem weak. And so I think there are lots of those fun thoughts that my depression gives me that I try to recognize early on, but sometimes I'm better at that than others. So thank you for sharing your experience. It really resonated with me.
I wanted to tap into this notion of hiding. What do we think hiding, or the attempt to hide our disability, does to us? What does it does to us? But then doubly, what does it do? What does it do to all those around us who may be dealing with the same thing? So to make that more lucid, hiding your disability, what does that do? What is the impact of that? Is there concern with that?
I think within oneself, like hiding it is like really debilitating, because you feel like you're hiding part of yourself. Like you can't be outward about who you really are. And I think it ultimately makes like those mental disabilities worse. And like personally, if I feel like I need to hide like how I'm feeling, or I need to act like I'm fine when I'm not fine, I end up feeling 10 times worse than I did in the beginning. And then as like a whole, how it affects everyone, I think it allows the conversation to not be had, because the people who are experiencing it aren't bringing it up. The people who aren't experiencing it aren't going to bring it up. So I think it allows for the silence and the uncomfortability that continues and circles around both mental and physical disabilities.
Janae, I think this really resonated with me, this notion of the discomfort, because I feel, especially with one of my family members who struggles with chronic depression, they weren't diagnosed early enough. And I feel that the added pressure of, you perform well in school, you are capable, people can rely on you. And this added stress of performing for others to meet their expectations and not getting the help you need really ends up in a situation that really implodes. And then either people react with shock, horror, or complete lack of understanding that, well, we don't know what this is. I don't know why you're going through it. As Dr. McLaren said, well, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. This is like, don't you know there are people who are worse off than you, who are dealing with life? And I think those can be really toxic ways of thinking about this. So I feel the hiding comes from stigma, right? Because you're afraid of the stigma, you're afraid of being othered. And I think it is that fear of othering and that isolation that Jenna was speaking about that comes from it really leads to this never-ending cycle of not talking about it, not being able to get the help, and then people being unresponsive. They either misunderstand you or they lack empathy, and then that is a vicious cycle where you have to keep performing. And as you pointed out, it only exacerbates the situation.
Shinee, one thing that you just mentioned was that people might not show empathy. And so I think one thing that I have experienced, and I know some others I've talked to have experienced, is when you do disclose to someone, sometimes they invalidate your experience. And so that makes that act of disclosure really aversive. And so it makes you less likely then to disclose that in the future, whatever it is that you're disclosing. And so I think the more that we can teach people to say things like, what do you need from me? How can I help you? Rather than those broad generalized sort of like, don't worry about it, which has never helped anyone in the history of ever, right? But everyone has probably heard somebody say, don't worry about it. And so I think helping people to respond in a more effective way would be one way that we could help to make these conversations happen more freely.
I will throw my anecdote, and I will also, after I conclude, like see if anyone had any response to what I say, but then also broaden it up to just anecdotal things in general. But to me, I feel as though a lot of people who have mental or physical disabilities participate in that hiding effect. And I would say that I have participate and still do participate in that hiding effect of, for me, as I said, like I'm visually impaired. And when I was in school, like from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade and high school, I had what's called orientation and mobility, which just simply means that I was taught cane techniques, which cane is the implement, the tool that you use to get around for blind people. And so I would have training to like catch the bus and catch like the light rail or cross the streets, to learn how to analyze intersections, learn how to elicit assistance from people on the street and stuff like that. Because for individuals like me, it's not as simple as just walking out, looking at the light, see if it's green or not, and crossing the street. For me, I have to do a whole lot of other things. So from kindergarten up to 12, I had to learn those different things. And for me, it was a situation where like I didn't want anyone to see me using my cane. I didn't want to bring it. For large portions of my life, I would much rather stumble around and like bump into something or anything like that and have someone just like, oh, because for me, like if you just look at me, it isn't 100% clear that I have a disability. And so I will cling on to that as tightly as I possibly could, because going back to what Brittany said, I didn't want to be labeled as stupid. Because just when we just speaking very honestly, when it comes to mental and physical disabilities alike, when individuals meet you, they automatically think that because you're blind or because you're hearing impaired or because you have depression or anything like that. With the mental disabilities, as Nick said, you're viewed as crazy or just slow. And a lot of times with the physical disabilities, you're viewed as you're just not intelligent, or you don't. So many questions I have been asked, like, do you go to the movies? Do you know how to get dressed? Do you know your way around your house? These type of things that to me, it's like, I'm still human. I know how to put my clothes on, just because I have a visual impairment, or just because someone may be deaf, or just because someone is dealing with depression, doesn't mean that they don't know how to feed themselves, don't mean that they are horrible in school. And so for me, I tried to hide it as much as possible. And then to this day, I still struggle with, having my cane in my hand and just having that being open of like, this is who I am, and I have to use this tool because it's a part of me, And to this day, I still get people to judge me based upon my disability, So that's why I go so hard when it comes to trying to speak as eloquently as possible, trying to carry myself in a way, because I already know that even despite every single thing that I do or every single thing that I did, I'm still going to run up against people who think that I'm not mentally capable of a lot of things that the rest of the population is.
Khalil, may I ask a question that kind of like some of the stuff you said triggered that thought? So how often with people of color, specifically immigrants in this country, you have this notion of the model minority, right? Or the model immigrant. But I think that's also true of people with disabilities, specifically physical disabilities. Do any of you want to speak to that, or am I speaking?
Can you unwound the model minority for us?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, when we talk about model minorities, either racially or it's often used in the context of immigrants, right? It's that very hardworking, probably hold 3 jobs, really believe in this very monolithic concept of the American dream, and then you achieve. So this is often associated with East Asians, right? And what that does is it puts, of course, not just the fact that it horribly only generates one narrative about a huge swath of people from different parts of the world, but it puts this impossible burden on them to be a certain image that is often curated by a imperialist or colonialist understanding of what quote unquote model means. This thought was kind of triggered by an essay that I read a few years ago by this visually impaired professor at, I want to say UC Berkeley, who talked about her anger at having to, to navigate the day and be expected to always be sunny and cheerful. And she blamed Helen Cross for it. No, I've got the name wrong, right? So never mind, my brain is kind of scrambled today. It's been a long day. But basically what she did was she was really upset about how the expectation of that any tiny resource that a university would throw her way was supposed to be something that she needed to be super grateful for, or the fact that, any accommodations were being made was a huge victory for quote unquote her people. And the fact that if she complained, she was ungrateful and she was setting her people back, that she had to represent not just herself, but all people who are visually impaired. So I'm wondering what other people might think about this, or if this might be just an anomalous position that one person wrote about.
Mm-hmm. Did that trigger anything with anyone?
I can definitely relate to it, being an immigrant myself and living in this country for 12 years and for around 10 years in Germany. I've seen it from different aspects of in Europe with a bunch of Middle Eastern countries and Northern African immigrants coming up to Europe and being treated in different manners of always being expected to be the ones that take the hard work that nobody else wants. And then the same that goes here in the US of having the immigrants from the Caribbean and South America and Mexico and things like that and taking those jobs. But I think that's more of an individual, not individualistic, but more of a majority of people like to look at other people and think that if they're going to come into my country, they're going to do the best job and only do this, or they're either expected to be on the far extreme other side of oh, they're just going to be bad people. And they forget that it's just around the world, there's always good and bad people. You can't set out a major expectation for people. You can't put so much pressure on other individuals and think this is the only way you can view them as a whole, because that's how you just get the worst aspects out of individuals. Because if you just constantly judge individuals by what you've made a preconception of stereotypes or things you've heard in the past, you're not going to get anywhere. Because for example, for someone that's been around 7 different countries and been in the military lifestyle, because my father, I've been to different aspects of the world. I've seen and heard other people from different ethnic groups, cultural groups, religions, and creeds and everything like that. So I've come up to a point where I just base people on their character and how they handle other individuals with respect and dignity, because it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter your religion, anything like that. I'm Buddhist. I respect everyone's choice of what they want to believe in. That's your own choice. But if you want to start disagreeing and being harsh with other individuals, I will not respect you. I will move on from you. I won't hold a grudge or anything like that, but I will keep my distance. It's you make your own choices. But if you want to be nice to other people, this is how it is. But I think more people are just more closed off and have a tunnel vision aspect instead of having an open mind by keeping their own perspective, but also looking at different other viewpoints to try to understand it. Same way as Khalil said, listen to understand and not just give out a response.
Right. I wanna throw this out there. And as I said about anecdotes, do any of us have any anecdotes of personal or what they've seen of this stigma playing out in real life. Because I think when we're having these conversations, yes, we can sit down and we can say, oh, like this happens in the world, or that happens in the world. But for ourselves, because yes, this is being recorded, so other viewers will watch it. So they may be like, oh, like they're talking about this issue. However, if we can bring in real life examples, it'll then show people that this actually occurs. And it not only occurred once, but it occurs multiple times through generations and generations. So do anyone have a moment or moments that they would like to share where this stigma played out in real life, where themselves or someone around them were labeled incorrectly or judged? Because the whole topic is you judged me before you met me. So is there any stories or anything like that that we have that we would like to share that just rubbed you the wrong way or made you feel a certain way personally about this topic?
Okay, I think I have one. So my mother has like, you know, those handicap placards you can have so you can park in like special parking. She has what's called what?
I said we have one. Get the best parking.
True. She has what's called degenerative disc disease. So basically the discs in her back just kind of crumble away. And so she has that because she has like really bad days sometimes where it's like hard for her to walk. Like she struggles to move. For a lot of people who have it, they end up in their 40s or 50s. They end up like in wheelchairs because of how debilitating it is. And there have been plenty of times where like we've parked in one of those spots and we walk out and my mom's having a good day. So it's not like she's walking any sort of special way. It's not like she's walking slowly and people are like, oh, so you're just like playing the system, right? Like, or when she had filed for disability, they're like, oh, so you're just going to use the government's money so you can, pardon my language, sit on your ass and not do anything. And it's just very frustrating for someone who's like viewing it from the outside. I imagine it's much harder for my mom to deal with, but like just knowing that they don't know what's going on and they're judging her just because of the way she's appearing in that certain moment. It's very frustrating because you're not going to sit there and tell someone your whole life story and tell them like, you're wrong. This is like really what's going on. But I think the fact that people often just judge based on one single moment in time rather than the however long someone's been living, I think it's very frustrating and angering.
I want to try to, sorry, was someone about to go for that? I want to, Jacob, if you don't mind, I want to pull you into, because, you know, you work at a mental hospital, and I'm pretty sure there are instances that even within, as Dr. Marks was saying, like, even if when you're in the field, some people may characterize you or demean you or belittle you for having a disability, physical or mental. So are there any situations, not only exclusive to your job, but is it anything that you would like to share as far as stories such as that where you've seen something along those lines?
Yeah, I think I love my job. I really like working with people in general. I figured that out really quickly coming into college, that I knew somewhere, wherever I end up, I wanted to help people. And I actually thought PT was my route. But then I wanted something more personal, something more that I knew more about people. And very quickly, when I found out about this place, I was a little afraid. So I even found myself in a minute of like stigmatizing what I was going to enter in. And but then when I started getting training and I started learning about the patients that I see every day, and not learning just about their diagnosis and what they're here for, but learning about them and who they are as people, I found these bonds and these connections with them. But I will say sometimes I've heard like other people who have worked there or have come in as students, and we have like nurse practitioners that come in, like nursing students and stuff like that. And like when we talk about the patients, they'll say, like, I've heard other people like say like, oh, like that person's actually like really smart, like they like read all these things. And sometimes when they talk about these languages and the way that they talk about some of the patients, like I kind of catch myself kind of like, a little bothered by it, because when you say like that person's actually really smart, it is diminishing to them. I mean, I think we often forget, working in the field, that these people had lives before they came here, and that they have stories of who they are. And I do unfortunately have seen it a couple times in my job, where people have said things that kind of diminish them. And um it's always very uncomfortable, especially because I'm the new girl. So, I kind of just sit there and I'm just like, like I don't understand, like, just because they have a diagnosis doesn't mean that they can't read, or that they can't do what we do as college students, or that they didn't have PhD degrees. And a lot of the time, the patients are trying to kind of like make themselves like, I don't know, feel validated. Like, people, I know that a lot of them are diminished, and I'm just like, you can ask them to do this. You can ask them to help you with this. Like, they don't expect you to be their servants or anything. Just help them in the best way. So, I definitely have seen it at my job before.
Kind of this notion of like, oh, if you have depression, then there's nowhere in the world that you can be intelligent. Or if you're deaf, or if you're deaf, or if you're hearing impaired, there's nowhere in the world that you enjoy reading, because that's just impossible, right?
So from my experience with my hearing impairment, so I didn't get a hearing aid until maybe about 3 years ago, maybe not even that long ago. And so I went my whole academic career having this issue, and it was identified on, maybe about third grade. But I certainly have had issues where, whether it's in the classroom or even professionally in a meeting, where there's some sort of really loud background noise, like let's say an air conditioner or something, that's most other folks there that are not hearing impaired would just be able to tune it out. But for me, I really then just cannot hear or cannot understand what other people are saying. And so there have definitely been times in both my academic as a student and my professional career where people are sort of like, are you paying attention? Like, what's going on? Are you dozing off? Like, are you with us? Do you not understand? And it's literally, I just cannot hear you. What's going on? And so it's really very difficult. And that's actually one thing I'm very grateful for from the pandemic, is that we have a lot of the bigger meetings on campus that are now on Zoom. So I can actually hear folks because I can wear my hearing
Yay, COVID has
headphones.
done something right.
Yeah, but at the same time, being in class with the masks and everything makes it much more difficult, because I do use some lip reading to help when I'm unsure of the words. So I think, yes, a little bit of good and a little bit of not great, but definitely has impacted me. And as someone who always, tries to do my best, I always try to be prepared. It's really disheartening when people make these assumptions that I'm not listening, or I don't care, or that I'm not paying attention, when it's just literally, I cannot hear you. Or if I can, it just sounds sort of like the Charlie Brown teacher, like, "Wah, wah, wah, wah," and I just don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to pull this, so I want to not redirect us, but slightly change our trajectory just a bit, because I believe both Shiny and Nick brought this up. And so I want to dive into it a little bit about this whole idea about taboo, especially when it comes to minorities. So do we believe, so I'm gonna lay this out on the table. Do we believe that to have a mental or physical disability when it comes to being a minority as well is more challenging? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I honestly, I think so. I mean, I think Janae's example with her mom was just a perfect example of something that happens a lot. And I think that, I think had it been, you know, a white person who had gotten out of your car, Janae, I don't think they would have used the line of, um, you're just abusing the system. I don't, and maybe that's just my opinion, but I definitely think that you have now two stigmas that are coming against you as a person. I think now you not only have the minority stigma and this, minority model to live up to, but now you have to validate the fact that now you also have another challenge that is also being stigmatized by society. And now you have kind of like these two huge battles that you kind of have yourself fighting all the time.
Mhm. I wanna pull on Nick just for a second because so I'm a backdrop it, and I'm gonna preface it by saying this, that I'm a mosaic mentor, which means that I work with first year intercultural students. So that's students of color and individuals who fall under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella. And so because of that, I've had around 20, I want to say maybe like around 20-ish mentees since I've been here. And in addition to those 20 mentees, I've had individuals of color to come to me and say, look, I have a mental disability or something like that. I have ADHD or something along those lines. But the very first thing out their mouth is that I don't want my parents to know. Or at home, this is not a thing. Like as Shinee said, it's taboo. You don't bring that up, especially if you're a minority. It's like a myth, you don't bring this up. And Nick, you talked about the whole notion of being weak. And so this whole thing about Black men, being kind of this figurehead of the family, had to be the strong, impervious person. And then do you think that kind of takes away from that image of being a Black man if you say you have depression or if you say you have anxiety, because you're looked at as not like someone that can provide because you're looked at as being weak? Is that something that I made up, or do you think that's very real?
Oh no, I think that's definitely like a real sort of thing, because I can't talk for all minority groups, but within the Black community, going to seeing a therapist and talk about depression, that's not a thing at all. Like the most amount of like talking you can do about mental health without fully saying it's mental health, it's going to the barbershop and kind of saying like, oh, I have a couple issues and this and that. And then you try to like sway it and saying, instead of like, oh, I have mental issues, I'm gonna say my friend has something going on, so I'm not being labeled as that, because I don't want everyone else seeing that, because it's like a weakness or this or that. And even my dad like talked about it as well, because like trying to talk to his parents about anxiety and things like that, that wasn't a thing, because back then they were just like, nope, you're going to be tough, you're going to make this work out, and then that's what it is. And at that point, like, he left, went to the military, and then that was the same thing. You're going to be tough, you're going to fight through it, you go get injuries, it doesn't matter, you're going to be a man. And that's what they always like said. But after a while, he was like, once I like started talking to him about his issues that he has with like PTSD and anxiety, and then I related him to my things, like I made a better like bond with him, because I was able to relate and like compare and contrast what was going on, and it brought us closer. And I think that's something that needs to be done more within the Black community and other communities as well, is to truly actually talk about these things, because a lot of people truly have these issues, but they just do not want to admit that they have them and be labeled as that sort of like weak individual that, oh, they can't take care of themselves, so how are they going to take care of their friends, their family members, or even have like a family and things like that. So I think it's definitely something that is a huge issue and needs to be like actually like sat down and talked about.
I'll attach this and then someone please like jump in. It seems as though that sometimes within the minority community, it's that fear not only from society that we deal with, but it's also that familial fear of being labeled and judged by your family as well. Because I want to broaden it out to not just Black, but I've heard Asian individuals, Hispanic individuals, Arab people come to me and all have said the same things of like, look, I don't want to let my parents know, or we know we got depression, but we don't acknowledge it because that's not a thing. You got a roof over your head. What you depressed about? You eat, don't you? Like, what do you like? There's nothing to be depressed about. So Does anyone else have any reactions to what Nick said and what I said and what Jacob said too?
I feel like you can even see it like the stigmatization, especially surrounding minority communities. Like if you even look at professionals working in like the mental health field, like I know personally, when trying to find a therapist, I would prefer to speak to a minority because I feel like they could relate to my problems and understand them and help me through them more. But like in all of the areas I've looked, it's so hard to find, like specifically I have been looking for like a Black therapist. It's so hard to find one, and I see everywhere it's hard to find a minority therapist, like period. And I think that's just another way that you can see it's like the stigmatization is so hard surrounding minorities and mental health working together that there's like a lapse in people who are even working in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's because you've had to be more resilient as a minority community that it makes it so much harder to sort of show any sign, be viewed as being weak for having to deal with some of these issues, mental issues? Do you think it's because of being a minoritized student or in minority community that you've had to kind of circle the wagons more and just be more independent and self-reliant?
I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
You go. No, you go.
Okay, I was gonna I wanted to touch back on like what Khalil also said, but President McLaren, you also brought up a really good point. I honestly do think that it is because at least, and like I said, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I do think that being a minority and struggling with figuring some stuff out myself, like I think even more of a problem. A lot of times I catch myself telling myself, well, I don't want to feel bad for myself, or I can't keep using that as an excuse. I keep telling myself and things like that. And that's honestly what stopped me a lot of the time from seeking help and talking to someone, because I keep telling myself, well, I already have, these barriers. I can't keep making excuses for myself to not pass these barriers. And so I do see that point in why I've been very hesitant of seeking help myself. But going back to what Khalil said too, I don't know a single person in my family that I know of that has any like mental issues. And it's interesting because my mom and my cousin always talked about studying psychology if they ever could. And I know my mom has gone through things that I'm sure were not easy. And I'm sure that, she could have had some mental setbacks herself. And so maybe this is a conversation I have to have myself, but even with me this semester, like I have gone through some hurdles that, I haven't really gone to really touch on yet. And I think my biggest hesitant thing is the fact that like in my family, I haven't heard about anybody struggling with mental stuff and things like that. So I don't know who to reach out with. I don't know how comfortable I am talking about these things because no one that I know has been struggling with these same things. So I definitely think that, in Hispanic households, at least, it is something really not talked about. And we're told a lot to, just keep going. When life kicks you down, get right back up. You got it. Like things like that. And to Khalil's point too, like, you're in college, like, that's a privilege. And obviously it's not going to be easy and things like that. So that's definitely something that I see, at least in Hispanic households.
I was going to say this, and Shinee, I'm a pull on you to assist me with this. But I think to answer your question, Dr. McLaren, is that it's a myriad of things, and it comes in very nuanced ways when you talk about minorities, because for just me speaking about blacks in America, it's kind of like we have gone through so much that it's like, and Jake, I'm pretty sure that you can attest to this as well. It's like, okay, you might be first gen or something like that, but your parents might have been immigrants or something like that. So they came all the way over here. They had to fight the odds and stuff like that. So if you're going through something that you might think is depression, like, no, that's not depression. Like, you just need to suck it up and keep on pushing. And I think that might be the immigrant / migrant way of viewing things, that, we didn't come all the way over here just for you to get swept up in American ideals, because I've had a lot of people tell me this, that, in Africa, and like in certain countries in Africa or South America, like it just this is not a thing. It just isn't. Like depression, anxiety is something that's strictly American. It's strictly a Western philosophy type thing. But then trying to bring it back home to my experience of being Black, this wasn't my experience because, as I said, my mother and sister and grandmother all faced mental illness. However, in the Black community, I can say that, because we have endured so much, we endure racism, our Black women, have experienced not only racism, but sexism to a higher degree. And I was thinking about this when Janae was speaking, that for us to be Black is like, you're just taught that, or you're seen as like, you should be tougher. And so you get a lot of this we get into like medical malpractice on Black women of being like, okay, they can handle pain much more. So if you're going through something that shows signs of depression for a white student versus a Black student, it's like, okay, that white student, yeah, that's clearly depression. That's clearly anxiety. But someone from me, for example, like I don't share this too often, but when I walk from Munn to like Stanton on that street, I don't know, I guess that's Sheridan. When I walk on Sheridan, those cars are extremely, extremely close to me. And because of my city, I come from Baltimore, I'm used to violence. Like I didn't grow up in it, but it's very real. At any moment, anyone could be taking out my life. And when I walk on that street, I just think about violence all the time. I think about getting shot and stuff like that. And so that's something I had to sort out. And so I think it's just different when you have a white student. Is like, yes, these are the signs. You are depressed. Let me prescribe you something. But for someone who's Black or Hispanic or Asian, it's like, no, that doesn't apply to you. What do we think about all of those? I know that was a lot.
Yeah, so Khalil, I think as I've been listening to all of you, that this is, I mean, obviously one can't speak to all of Asia, but it's definitely a big part of the Asian American community that you at least see being voiced now. And my experience growing up in India was that in a school of several thousand people, I literally knew only one person who admitted to being in therapy. And the kind of ridicule she faced, the sort of disparaging, she was bullied for it, right? So obviously, I feel if there was anyone else in class who was also in therapy, would never, I mean, I wouldn't have said anything if I saw what happened to the one girl who admitted it. But it's also, I feel like with this narrative of success, especially if we're looking at the image, so I kind of have two views of it. One, growing up in India, where, as you pointed out, this is an American thing. So you don't have the luxury of having any sort of mental disability, because this is a construct of white folks, right? They have the luxury of doing that. We don't have the luxury. There's too much going on here. And when it came to physical disability, very few resources. So the narrative always is, again, curative, or this sense of really, I think Jacob and Janae were talking about this rhetoric of diminishing people. So you diminish people with physical disabilities. They can't do this. They can't go to a quote unquote regular school. And it limits every kind of life experience they have. So it's the rhetoric of pity and isolation versus the rhetoric of no one has the luxury. You're Indian, you're not white. So this is a myth of the white man. And when you come here, add the narrative and the burden of success. You must be a success story. And not to mention that first generation Indian Americans specifically really struggle, because I feel their parents hold on to often archaic notions of Indian culture that maybe back in India people don't have. So for instance, now when I look at younger cousins or some children of my friends who are in therapy and they make no bones about it. Whereas when I think about when I was growing up or when I was a young adult, that was very difficult. Or even if you talk to someone, you see something and you say, I think this is something that a therapist could help. Okay, where is a therapist? Do we have a good one? Or is like one size fits all? One person who treats everyone from age 3 to 83 is probably not. I mean, there are no resources in school, you know, no one is talking about it. So I think slowly things are changing, but I feel that here too, right? I mean, depending on the school you go to. So if we talk about, you know, people in minority communities, depending on the resources your school has, either you have awareness or you either have accommodations made for you or not, in which case, doesn't that add to this taboo and the stigma and the isolation?
That was a lot, and that was a lot of great things and like gems. And one thing that really, it was a lot of things, but just the last thing, when you look at the climate of LVC, I've had students come to me and say, you know, I want to get counseling. However, you know, we tout 50-50, you know, helpers and stuff like that. And we tout, you know, above short, like the counseling services there. But I feel as though that when it comes to those services, they only serve white students because, as Janae said, and as Jacob said as well, to be a minority, we don't feel comfortable in going to those resources because we feel as though that they can't understand where we're coming from. And as I said about the whole medical malpractice, we're just viewed as being stronger. So we're not, you know, we can take pain more, which is unrealistic. That we can just take pain more than white people or white women or anything like that, you know? And so if we do go to these white people who might be 50-50 or in the counseling services, which we probably won't, but if we do, we run the risk of one, them not understanding our struggles and not knowing how to deal with what we bring to them, because we deal with some real issues. Like I said about walking along the street, every single day, people don't know this about me. So in addition to me facing the racism on this campus, in addition to me facing the discrimination that I face when it comes to me being visually impaired, in addition to all these other things, I'm going through class and stuff like that, I'm still thinking about my family and if they're safe back in Baltimore, because I know at any given time, any given second, that they can be taken from this world just because of the city that they're in. If I go to a counselor, they're not going to understand that. But then if we do all of it, if I get over all those hurdles and I still go to this person, it's this thing where they may not label what I got going on the correct way. So I think even when we look at Shinee, when you bring up the part about just the campus and the climate and like the resources and stuff like that, I think we had to do a better job of looking at the resources that's presented here, because so many students like blatantly, I'm not going to 50-50. I'm not going to Shorter because they're white. And this white person, this white man or woman or student can only serve best the other white students on campus. And I want to ask this. So I want to like be very pointed with like Dr. Marks, Dr. McLaren and Brittany, like when minorities talk about these certain things, is this surprising? Is this something that you was aware of? That I think Jacob brought it up in a very eloquent way about this idea of intersectionality, and Nick did as well when it comes to just the way that we live our life. Like we're dealing with. You may say, okay, that person, like we're dealing with depression. I have depression. You have depression as well. I'm Black, you're white type thing. However, understanding that to be a minority in this world, not even just in this country, we have extra layers that's on top of it. So did you think that was a thing? Did you think that like did this take you by surprise at all to hear the admissions?
I would say yes and no. So I can appreciate.
Sorry, you say yes and no?
Yeah. So let me explain why. So, for example, in myself, I would have no qualms about seeing a Black medical provider, a Black therapist, a Black dentist. But I can appreciate that I haven't had the life experiences that you have had, which would change that interaction. So I can understand that. On a broader scale, we just don't have, and I think was it Janae saying that, we just don't have enough Black and brown people going on into these fields, medicine, counseling, and I think we need to do more about that clearly at the college level to help with those pathways. But so that's why it's yes and no. For myself personally, I wouldn't have an issue with that, but I can understand the position that you're speaking from, Khalil.
Yeah, let me be more pointed, more direct. I'm saying like, is it a surprise to you, not about the lack of resources, but that is a part of it. Are you surprised that minorities have a harder time when it comes to acknowledging and coping and dealing with mental and physical disabilities?
No, no.
Can you explain?
I think it was said, and I would agree, and I don't remember who's, maybe it's Yaka that said it, that you're compounding one thing on top of another. So there's almost like a multiplying effect. Mm-hmm. So all of the things that we've talked about, and many have spoken to about the stigma, particularly of mental illness, you then couple that, and it magnifies, I think, by the challenges that minorities face generally in society in the US.
Yeah, so to share my thoughts a little bit, I think at the very beginning, Khalil, you had asked us sort of be aware of your own reactions. And I think one of my reactions hearing you all is, shame and guilt, because I consider myself an aspiring ally, an aspiring anti-racist. And I say aspiring because I don't think that I have the right to label myself as an ally or an anti-racist. I think that's for the communities to do that. And so I would welcome any students coming to talk to me. And I think for me to hear that there might be people on campus who wouldn't feel comfortable coming to me, it's a little bit hurtful, because I really want to be able to help. And at the same time, I definitely understand that people want to talk to folks who they think will understand them. And maybe they don't think that I will be able to understand them. And so, I think it's really tough. And I think this is where you said, like, kind of push yourself through. So I'm trying to like push myself through and share this with you all. And I think this is the point where people are like, well, what can we do? Right. And so I think I'm just trying to sort of sit with that feeling and experience that feeling for a minute, because I think that probably reflects what you feel like a lot of the time, where you feel like maybe you're not being recognized, or you're not being understood, or you're not being listened to. And so I think that's really hard for me. And then I want to just add on what Dr. McLaren said, kind of tying in with some of what you all shared earlier about kind of cultural backgrounds. I think white people have to take responsibility for this as well. And so I think so far that's been kind of absent from this conversation. And so there are so many systems of institutionalized racism that are preventing people of color, people of diverse backgrounds from entering the mental health field, so that there is not representation in people who are providing. There's not representation in research. Those questions are not being asked and answered. And so I think not just at the college level, but all the way down, think about things like redlining and school districts early on. I mean, it's great if we can do things at the college level, but folks have already had to hurdle so many barriers by the time they get to this level. I think there needs to be some kind of wider things that are done. So, I think, um, speaking on behalf of white people, I'm sorry that we have done this to you all. And I hope that, folks that are open to conversations like this start to really make a difference, and not just say things that they want to change, but actually take the actions and follow through. So I know that was a lot, but that was what was on my mind.
No, thank you so much. And I think what you said cradled your previous statement of like feeling hurt and guilt, about what, everything, like, Black students or Hispanic students or Asian students may not feel comfortable coming to a white counselor, just someone white in general, because we already assume that, we won't be heard, or we won't be able to, they won't be able to share in our grief and stuff like that when it comes to our issues. And so, I love that you said that, you had to take ownership of it, so it's not a part of like understanding that your feelings of like, yes, I'm hurt by it, but then also understand like, do I have the right to be hurt? Because this is kind of like, I made that bed, so let me lay in it. If I feel hurt, looking at the reason as to why, like, okay, where it was self-inflicted. It was self-inflicted of the trauma, the lack of appreciation that Black people can have to say, okay, because this is something that's cradled in the minority community. I'm just speaking about in America. As we know, when you look across, like overseas is different. But in America, that's stigmatization, not looking specifically at stigmatization when it comes to the disability in general, but just the stigmatization within the own community. It's because, and as you said, Dr. Marks, a lot of it has to do with the white contributors to all of that. So I thank you for saying that, and taking ownership, and maybe, other white individuals, can understand that ownership as well. Because I say this a lot of times, that until I feel as though that to be Black or to just be a minority in general, we think about race every single day. We might not think like, oh, that's racist, or that's racist, or that's racist every single day, but we think about it. We think about race, our existence of being race, like having a race every single day. And to be white, you don't have to think about that. You don't have to think about your whiteness every day. The same way, if we switch over to male and female, to be male, I don't think about being a man every day, but I would hazard a guess and roll my dice and say that to be a woman, women think about being a woman way more than men think about being men. And so if we can work on, if white people can be as every single day to think about how can I be anti-racist and how can I make sure that I'm being a better ally and a better accomplice to the world around me and to my minority brothers and sisters, if every single day you do that work of saying, okay, I'm waking up today, I understand that, as you said, an aspiring anti-racist individual. If every day I wake up with that agenda, in the same way that every day minorities wake up saying that I'm thinking about race, that's the only way that we can move to a better understanding and a better future. I want to, we're coming close to our end, but I did want, Brittany, if you feel comfortable, do you mind sharing a little bit about what you received from this last 10 minutes or so of exchanges?
Yeah, so I 100% definitely agree with what Dr. Marks was saying. Obviously, it's hard to follow that up. But back to your question about, is it surprising that people of color feel this way about going to therapists? I would say, yes, I'm surprised, but I'm also not surprised. When first hearing it, like, obviously I'm not experiencing this firsthand because I am a white woman, but hearing it is surprising, but knowing why is not surprising. After like opening my eyes to like why people of color feel this way, I'm not surprised. But I would say yes and no.
Yeah, thank you. And I have kept y'all for much longer than an hour. I think we're like at an hour 20. But before I let you all go, I wanted us to, I know Dr. Mark students out there like, oh, this is those hard questions of like, what do we do now? But I think it still would be interesting to one, say, how do we think that stepping back, but also stepping back out of the minority conversation, but still stepping back to look at it and have it in our sights. How do we think that we can go about erasing that stigma? How can we, like we already talked about, not hiding. And I think that's extremely important so that, like, as Nick was saying about, being a part of the community. And correct me if I'm misquoting you, Nick, but it seemed as though that once you realize that there was a wider community, this was not individualistic, but once you realize that this was a broader community of people that are dealing with the same troubles or similar troubles that you are, that it made it a whole lot easier. Your oxygen came back and it made it easier to breathe with it. So that was one thing that would say, owning it. And that's a journey, that's an individual journey, but I think it's such a powerful journey when you wrap your head around it, acknowledging the fact that, yes, I have depression, or yes, I'm deaf, or yes, whatever the case may be, yes, I am blank. I think that's one way that we can try to erase the stigma, but I just wanted to hear from you all. What do you all think? And to forcibly get some to make sure that we hit everyone. I want to start, and Shinee, can I start with you?
Yes, of course. So I think start with a little bit of anecdotal evidence. You know, I've been at LVC for almost 4 years now, and every year I have multiple students who are not my mentees who come and talk to me, and I'm always grateful that they come to me as a safe space. But one thing that has really, really been troubling this semester is literally every student I've spoken to has talked about feeling isolated and having no one on campus they can go to. And they don't think anyone understands them. And sometimes when they talk about their problems, and they don't feel comfortable going to counseling services. And I've realized specifically one conversation I had this week was, I had that experience as an immigrant student myself who had been on an F1 visa. I could give the student advice, and I didn't have a response when they turned to me and said, okay, but this isn't your job. Why don't I have someone to whom I can go? Why isn't there an office who can help me with this? Because I know there are not that many of us, but don't we count? Even if I'm the only student, don't I count? Because Dr. Bhattacharya, I don't think I count, because no one cares about me. No one cares that I'm going mad trying to figure out my immigration status, and there's no one I can talk to. What should I do? And so it's really heartbreaking, but to not, depress us and want us to throw ourselves off, I mean, okay, that was a terrible way of framing it. Let me reframe that. To not sort of end this on a miserable note, I do think, Khalil, conversations like this need to happen more, and they need to happen across campus. And it isn't just enough for us to just talk about it. We need to have workshops. We need to have training so that faculty, staff, and students know what to do. Because if we want the stigma to go away, if we want awareness, if I'm going to say that I'm struggling with something, I should be in a space that is comfortable, and I should have other people who can say the same. So we make ourselves visible, and we create a community, and that's possible through resources. So that's my wish for 2021 and going forward, that's what we need to have.
What is it like? I used poetry slam snaps in my last session, so I didn't want to be repetitive because I'm in all of these sessions, but I want to do like a stage clap, for that was very well put, and I love every single piece of it. Janae, how about you? And also, if you can weave in just like takeaways from this conversation as well, so I can start to wrap this thing up for us, because we've been working hard. But what do you think we can do to erase this stigma? And then also, what were some of your takeaways from this conversation?
So I think a way to open up the conversation is for those people who are struggling and who are internalizing a lot of things to be open. Because as I said earlier, people who aren't experiencing it aren't going to start the conversation because A, they may feel like it's not their place, and B, they honestly might just not care. So they're not going to want to talk about it. So it's up to the people who are experiencing it to start the hard conversations and to lead the discussion. And I think my biggest takeaway is that, not that I was doing it before, but just an emphasis on, you don't know people's stories. You know a chapter, 2 pages of their book. You didn't read it from cover to cover. And I think that's just really important for everyone to remember, that you don't know what's all going on. Maybe what's on the surface, or maybe what's a couple inches deep, but you don't know everything.
Mm-hmm. And I would kind of braid that to the front. I would take the end of what you say and braid it to the beginning. Yes, I believe that those who are going through the issue should be the ones who speak out about it. However, we need to make sure that those who aren't going through it, who this isn't a part of their daily life, still express interest and still become an ally and a helper, and more compassionate about things that don't affect them. Because I think that we live in a very selfish society where people only care about the things that directly affects them, but people don't donate to cancer initiatives unless, and I'm speaking in general, not saying anyone on this call or saying whole list universally, but people don't donate to cancer causes unless someone in their family has been affected by cancer. People don't care about standing out for Jews, like anti-Semitic issues, unless they are Jewish or something like that. So we got to make sure that we're doing that heavy lifting, making sure that we're advocating, being allies for things that are outside of our immediate, I don't want to say our immediate interest, because I feel as though it should be our interest, but things that are not in our immediate sphere, we should show more compassion and acceptance for. I want to go Nick. Reactions, but also what do you think we can do?
I think the biggest thing is definitely like how it was mentioned, but prior, like doing workshops and like talking to individuals. But something that I can like relate to, because I had to talk to my dad about this as well, because he's very big in like economics and political aspects and like views and like discussing about things, and he's like very historically based on like information, things like that, and does his research and like tries to have discussions with people, but he gets upset when people cannot see the truth in certain aspects and are stuck on things. And I think something that I can see here based on like LVC with the students I've like talked with and encountered, that even though we want to make changes, there are some people that we need to understand that you cannot help. And no matter how much information we can put towards them, you should not have to force people into listening to what your cause is. Try to reach the people that actually do want to listen, want to be educated, and want to engage in trying to make a change. Because there will always be people that will have like a negative mindset of not wanting to listen, not wanting to change, thinking that they have the right views and think that you're just like ignorant to any sort of like other belief systems. You just need to focus on who you have around you, stay positive with that aspect, and like try to make things better in your community that you can reach out to, and then as well as to other communities that need their help and you're able to reach.
And hopefully those people who don't care, or those people that we can't help, will eventually become the minority. Correct?
That, or even better, they actually do come around and see the things that has been happening and actually make the change, which I hope actually starts happening.
I want to go with Dr. McLaren. Takeaways from the conversation, but also what do you think we should do?
So I've been impressed by all of the comments that have been made tonight. I think this is an important topic. I think it'll become more important going forward. I go back to somebody talking about the isolation. I think it was Shinee, when you talked about students feeling isolated. I think this has been a very isolating time, and I think it's going to take a lot of work in our community to move forward. So, I'm fortunate in the position that I can help move change along. And part of what I wanted to get out this evening was to really do a lot of listening and hear what others had to say, what others were experiencing, what others saw the challenges that the college faced in this space. So I think I've learned a lot. I'm appreciative of that. And, I hope that we can continue this conversation going forward, and we can work towards, and I can exert my influence to move change.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's go, Jacob.
I think I don't know what to start with. Okay. I'll start with like changes we could make. I don't know if your question was more to just like at LVC or like in our community, or just like overall in like American society, but so I'll just answer it in kind of both. But like in terms of like American society, I kind of wish that we started out younger. I feel like I only started really talking about mental health when I got to like middle school, like when changes were expected to happen. But like I feel like we go through major changes all our lives, and things around us are changing all our lives. And as we learn more about mental health, like there are things that genetics are even controlling that we are coming to understand. So I feel like we should be normalizing mental health, just as we normalize being sick. from very, very early on, and from down in elementary, and helping even kids and children understand that our minds and how we think sometimes need a little love too. And I think that's specifically as in terms of LVC. I think like what Dr. Bhattacharya said too about like the workshops and talking about it more is really important, but I would like to see it more than just during the first year and during orientation. I think seeing it throughout my years, like I know for a fact in orientation, you know, after you go through those first 2 days of lectures, like the rest of the week doesn't even matter to you. So I think not only not throwing it all in one week, but just having it sparsed out within the years, and maybe having them having to go through these things and having them all the time, so that we are normalizing it and so that we are all learning how to support each other as a whole. And I think it would just be really helpful. In terms of my takes away from today's conversation, I think my biggest takeaway is that I think kind of goes to what Janae said in terms of like getting to know people. I think for me, it helped me understand that I'm not alone, and that my struggles happen to a lot of people too. And I think, at least in my sense, I will move forward knowing that I'm not alone, and that there's also probably a lot of other people who are also going through my things. Though I know for me, I will speak out more and be willing to hear more.
Thank you so much for that. Let's swing to Dr. Marks.
Sure, thank you. I think a lot of what everyone else already said was, kind of what was on my mind. One thing that I try to focus on in my classes is language use and identifying microaggressions as they happen. And so those of you who have had me in class will know that we use the oops, ouch rule. And so if somebody says something that's offensive or not inclusive, we use the oops, ouch rule to bring attention to it and to talk about what would be a more inclusive and respectful way to have that conversation. So I think if something like that could be implemented more broadly across campus, I think that would be really helpful, because I think a lot of times people are hurt when others don't even really realize that something that they've said has been hurtful. And so by bringing those conversations into the classroom, I think is our responsibility as educators to help people to make more inclusive spaces. And so I think that would be one way. And then I think as far as takeaways, for me, I think just continuing to listen and trying to find ways to demonstrate that I am willing to listen and to be supportive in whatever ways that means for my students and for my coworkers. And so recognizing that I'm still learning and I have a long way to go, and at the same time recommitting to that journey. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. And Brittany.
So I definitely feel like I can agree with what everyone has said so far. I love gaining more knowledge and just getting more educated, like opening my eyes, but also my mind. One of the main takeaways that I got was Janae basically took the words out of my mouth, but basically reading into somebody and not just seeing what's on the outside, because you can't judge someone by only what you see. You can only judge someone by honestly nothing, but you only know what's on the outside until you actually get to meet someone. And I feel like that was definitely one of the big takeaways that I had.
I'm glad that not that I'll put you last, but I'm glad that you said that, because it evoked something that I think I want to say for my takeaway is that talking about, jumping on the A bandwagon as well, I feel as though that we all participate in this labeling type thing. I think we all do. And I think it would be naive of us to say that we don't. So when it comes to mental or physical disabilities that people face, I think that we all have labeled, we all have judged, we all have said things, done things that wasn't indicative of humanity. We shouldn't have, done those things or said those things. And so I think for the sake of this conversation, I would challenge you all and myself to make sure that going forward that we acknowledge the things that we have done, and just be better allies. When obviously it's not all the time that we will, just when we talk about minorities, to have depression, that you're in a minority in this country, to have a visual impairment, to have ADHD, you're a minority in this country. And so because of that, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not going to be often that we come across people who have a disability. And so when we meet those people, which are going to be far and in between, we have to make sure that we treat them with dignity in the same way that we treat every other person. Let them prove to you who they are before we put an assumption or put a judgment, put a label on who they are. Let them prove to us who they are, and then we can move forward. I think if we do that as a society, we'd be in a much better state, so that we don't get comments such as Jaka shared of, oh, like, I'm surprised, like some of them are actually smart. Some of them can actually read. It should be like, did they show you any other way? Did they show you anything that should be different that you thought that they couldn't read? So we should make sure that with everyone, no matter who they are, that we're approaching them with dignity and compassion and understanding. And so I encourage all of us to move to a better place in our life, to say, I'm gonna be an ally to not just people who have mental illness, but I'm gonna be an ally to those who have physical disabilities, and then vice versa. Physical disabilities, if I'm deaf, if I'm vision impaired, if I have anything like that, I'm gonna make sure that I'm not only advocating and supporting and going just as hard as for those who are blind. I'm gonna do the same thing for those who had mental disabilities as well. So that was my huge takeaway. I appreciate everyone for having this conversation. I appreciate us for being extremely open and honest with each other. What we shared in this conversation, wasn't easy, and it wasn't lighthearted at all. And I hope that we all have taken this and can use it and apply it to our daily life. We say this all the time, that when we have conversations like this, it's amazing that we had it, but how we want to apply it. So we have to make sure that when I hit end on the Zoom call, that the conversation doesn't stop, that it only amplifies and that it only intensifies in our daily life and wherever we go. So 2 challenges: one, that we challenge ourselves to not to just show our humanity, but then 2, that we continue to have these conversations and just push the boundaries and stuff like that. So once again, I want to thank everyone for being in this conversation with us. Thank you for agreeing to have these uncomfortable conversations. As you know, this has been recorded, and what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to put it on the Office of Intercultural Affairs OYA YouTube channel. And I just help, if everyone can help and assist with just pushing it as far and wide as possible when we do get it up on the YouTube channel, that'd be absolutely amazing. But I'm gonna end the conversation here. I've stolen an hour and 40 minutes of your time, which I'm sorry about, but thank you so much, everyone, for having this conversation.
Thank you, Khalil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Khalil.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody.